Hello everybody. So this week's newsletter again is coming to you in video form because we have a lot to cover. It's Freedom Day, week 1 in the UK and Europe, and then lockdown in various other countries. So what's very clear is that we need to know how to coexist with this invisible threat that ripples through our societies and really actually is changing them and our future of how we interplay with each other and ourselves, because life will never be the same. So we're really questioning and adapting our psychological, our internal dialogue, as well as our new systems too. But we must not forget that as humans and as a human species, that we are our own microorganism. We come into contact with about 1 million different viruses each day, and evolutionarily in our history have always coexisted with viruses. But what has gotten lost along the way is that we've kind of looked at our bodies as compartmentalized them and not realized how we are actually a whole complex, intelligent organism. And so all of these fears and anxieties that are happening of how we relate and interrelate with ourselves and the world, and particularly we're seeing effects and threats of long COVID too. There's a lot of research coming up in there of how to handle that also. We need to really build resilience and understand and take responsibilities for ourselves, because then we don't live in any fear. So let's look at kind of what we can do to empower ourselves and our bodies. Because I'm not sure if some of you know that I'm part of the functional medicine task force, which is kind of medical and nutritional alternative medicine, really understanding what's going on from a naturopathic functional medicine standpoint into the disease instead of a band-aid effect. So what we're seeing really is what happens when you face a virus is there's a whole cascade that happens in a healthy individual, but with our world, we kind of block the process. So we start with a differing immune response. So viruses come in all the time, and then you have your immune army. They're made up of natural killer cells, T cells, B cells, antibodies, and they would neutralize and mediate a response and deactivate the virus. And then there'll be some residual minimal inflammation. This is what happens in a healthy person. But what we're seeing with those that are really affected with the virus is that there's an excessive infiltration of monocytes and macrophages and cytokines. So they're what make up inflammation in our body. And so you know from listening to me, and you know in the literature at the moment, is that inflammation and stress is really the basis of all of our modern chronic diseases. And so what's happening with the virus is there is that we lose our cells. So there is this residual inflammation that stays in our bodies, and these cytokines, these more proteins, are really staying and being activated and switched on in our body. So it's almost like our immune system is on hyper alert, but to the detriment to our cells. And this is kind of what happens in autoimmune diseases too. And so what happens if we've got hyperinflammation in our bodies and our system, this then cascades and moves to various organs in our body. And whatever your individual DNA footprint is responsive to, and as well as your family history, it will impact and create more inflammation around that organ. So that's number one. So what can we do? Of course, there's always an action step that we can do to prevent and really work with viruses. We want to look at taking antivirals if it's not happening. We want to prepare our body too. So when I go traveling, maybe to a country that I haven't kind of been around or grew up in, or the food is different to the system, to my system, I will always take my grapefruit seed extract. I'll take olive leaf. I'll take some natural antimicrobial, antiviral, antibacterial herbs that these actions occur in one herb. So nature is so powerful because it has this pharmacological effect. And then what you want to be doing is making sure that your immune system is modulating, so it's always in balance. So you're really up-regulating our natural killer cells. We actually have some cells called natural killer cells. And so there you're looking at your phytochemicals. So I talk a lot about phytonutrient diversity here too. So really all of your vegetables and fruits, the color, the pigments, they're so important. So they're called phytochemicals, and each phytochemical, there is about 50,000 different enzymes that create a whole cascade and response that work with your individual biochemistry. They switch on and switch off disease. And then as well, we can look at why mushrooms. There's a lot of great research in mushrooms, but I would be taking a mushroom complex, or I am taking a mushroom complex, which is Cordyceps and Reishi. There's been a lot of, I've seen some great results with my clients too, 1,000 milligrams of each. And then you want to maybe be looking at licorice, which balances your blood sugar. Don't take it if you have heart problems, echinacea and astragalus, but speak to your health provider and they'll be able to help you with those. The next thing is that we're looking at our oxidative environment of the cell. So the environment of the cells. So you would have heard about antioxidants and things like that. What they do is they add an extra oxygen into your cells, so you don't have this inflammation, like this fire in your body. So if a virus is able to bind and enter to your cell, this suggests that the patient is infected with RNA and viruses. So usually in a healthy cell, a virus won't be able to necessarily cause an effect to your RNA unless there's chronic stress. So this is actually called inflammaging. There's some research now into how the people that really accelerate the aging process is when their cells are inflamed in the exact same cascade that I just spoke to you about. And so what can we do to decrease inflammaging and decrease oxidative stress? We obviously want to look at stress. So you want to look at all the tools that you have to decrease stress. We can talk about that in another episode. Because raised cortisol levels do increase inflammation and cell damage, which causes aging, accelerates aging. This is why, I do my detoxes every quarter, because we're really focusing mainly on adding plant diversity and reducing inflammation so we can handle all threats that are faced to us. And in phytochemicals is, if you look at the biochemical structure, it means that the ring-like structures can actually move electrons around and give oxygen to those cells that are damaged. I'm a big fan of intermittent fasting. The research there is really great. Women, just be careful when you're menstruating and in your cycle too. Sometimes you have to be careful there. Otherwise, men, and I do swear by intermittent fasting to down-regulate inflammation and blood glucose. Then lastly, the microbiome, good bacteria. The last 4 years in particular, we've been able to see phenomenal research. And as well, when we look at our guts, when we look at bacteria, our immune system, the GOLT, is actually based in our guts. So the role of the GOLT, which is gut-associated lymphoid tissue, that's a biochemical phrase for you, but it's basically, it manages the immune system to respond to, massive antigen exposure through our diets too. By what we eat too is what creates an immune response, and that's really where our adaptive immunity, that immune army comes from, to host. It hosts any mucosal pathogens too, which ends up in our lungs and really is causing that lung inflammation that we're seeing in COVID. So what happens when we've got lack of diversity in our gut, so lack of good bacteria, lack of plant nutrients, lack of phytonutrients, we lack the resilience and less good colonies of bacteria to really attack external threats. And again, so we're seeing some really great literature. There's some recent studies about how the gut microbial composition reflects disease severity and dysfunctional immune responses in patients with COVID-19. This is recent research out through an increase of this inflammatory cascade, which is those cytokines, which affects autoimmune disease. And then we've also seen in patients actually with long COVID. So if you don't have the active virus of COVID anymore, but you're still experiencing symptoms, patients, we've seen that there's certain immunomodulatory bacteria in your body. I can't pronounce them, but it's Fusobacterium prosnitzi. Those levels go down. That keep inflammation under control. And so once the virus is gone as well in COVID, long COVID, we're seeing that patients still have this dysbiosis. Dysbiosis means that there's an imbalance between good bacteria and bad bacteria, the latter being running the show. So this could play a role in the fatigue and inflammation and mucus in the lungs that we're seeing. So what is the action? So we really want to restore the beneficial gut species in our gut to mitigate any symptoms of the disease. And so I'm not really a fan of just taking a pill and that will solve the problem, because then that's something that we call green pharmacy. It's doing the exact same as pharmacological medicine, which is really great, but we're not treating the root cause. We need to treat the root cause. We need to teach your bodies how to grow its own bacteria. So what we want to do first is we want to 5R program. You can talk to me about that. Functional medicine is remove, repair, and re-inoculate your gut systems. Or you can start with just simply prebiotics. Prebiotics feed good bacteria. So that's foods like your leeks, your garlic, your onion, your artichokes, your chicory, your Jerusalem artichoke, because they are so rich in fiber. Fiber is so important as well, because that's how your gut bacteria grows also. Then you want to be looking at probiotics, food source probiotics. I'm very pro food source, because your body is made up of food and biochemistry, and it can intake all of it. So we want to be looking at things like miso, fermented miso, organic, sauerkraut, yogurt, making sure that there's no sugars in there, so your natural yogurts if you can tolerate, kimchi and kombucha and the like. And then you as well want to be looking at your polyphenols, so these phytonutrients that we've been speaking about, because they host extra fiber and extra probiotics naturally occurring in them with low sugars. So that's your berries. The darker the color, guys, is what is usually most nutrient and more dense in it. And your olives, your herbs and spices. Your herbs and spices are included in your 5 a day, but if you've been working with me, we work on 10 a day. So that's quite long and quite winded, but again, just message me if you have any questions, any queries, and I'm happy to help. Most importantly, let's take responsibility for our health. Let's keep in our power.